I will quickly just introduce who our panelists are. In addition to Kwadwo, we would also be having Luiz. Luiz is a partner in the London office of Mayor Brown. Also, we have Tom Fu.
Hi, Tom. Good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Excellent. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Hi, Luiz. Fantastic. So, Tom,
hello.
Sarah, we've introduced you just before you came on stage, and I will just quickly introduce Krista Lee, QC. Krista is a barrister in Keating's chambers. Good morning, all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning, everybody in the room here with me and everybody following remotely. I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to this session, the Belt and Road Initiative, Where to for African Infrastructure Projects. Now, we're going to be looking with today's panelists at the Belt and Road Initiative and what it means for construction in Africa. I think what we'll have noted already from some of the other panels is that there have been multiple mentions of Chinese investment, Chinese development, and Chinese construction in Africa, and some of the good and some perhaps not so good aspects of that. What we're going to do on this panel now is delve into that in rather more detail. Now, what is RI? Is its sheer scale, both in terms of its ambition, its geographical reach, the volume of investment that China has committed and continues to commit in Africa by way of this initiative. And the profound effects and impacts of the BRI can be seen across Africa in terms of the large infrastructure investments and projects that have been made. You will hear some statistics from the panelists in describing some of the detail of it, which I think are truly staggering. And I certainly feel on a visit to any African city, however brief, doesn't take long before one stumbles across a major Chinese backed piece of infrastructure development, engineering, or construction that's in evidence across the continent. So it's within this context that it's clear the legal community in Africa and internationally has a crucial role to play. The legal advisors in relation to this are crucial to providing a clear and robust contractual framework to allow these projects to proceed successfully and to avoid, or at least to efficiently deal with, disputes where they arise. So in this session, we'll be hearing from 4 expert panelists with a range of specialist perspectives. And these will encompass both the African and the Chinese views and perspectives in relation to BRI. And of course, each of these panelists works internationally and so has a balanced overview as well. Now, I'm sure these speakers' presentations will prompt many questions, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions, both from the live and virtual audience at the end. But I don't want to keep people from lunch too long either. So we'll be working through in the following order. Krista Lee, QC, who, as Ngor mentions, is a top construction disputes barrister at Keating Chambers in London, will start off by explaining some of the opportunities offered by the BRI in different sectors in Africa. That'll be followed by Sarah Grimmer, Secretary General of the HKIAC, talking about how risks can be effectively mitigated through the assistance and the work that HKIAC does in resolving disputes in relation to African projects. We'll then hear from Tom Fu, who's a partner of mine at Mayer Brown, based in Hong Kong with extensive Chinese experience. And what he's going to share with us is his insights on Chinese sentiment in relation to BRI investment in Africa. And we will conclude with Luiz Aboim, another partner at Mayer Brown with specialized expertise in relation to the energy sector, in relation to disputes, and in relation to the Lusophone African market. And he's going to look at the interesting area of hydrogen investments and the BRI. So without any further delay, I'll now hand over to Krista Lee, QC, to start us off. Thank you very much, Krista.
Thank you very much, Kwadwo. It's very nice to be joining you all, albeit remotely. Here's my presentation, and I just want to take a few minutes really to discuss the opportunities for different sectors in Africa from the BRI. Let's start off with some statistics. So since about 2000, there has been about 153 billion worth of loans from China across Africa. And you can see from this table that those loans have increased and peaked in 2013 when the BRI initiative was announced by China. There's then been another peak in 2016, and albeit looks as if that investment is now slowing, there's still projections that the investment from China will be sustained. And to some extent, this graphic is just showing loans, but that's only part of the picture. It's a graphic that's been pulled together by the Johns Hopkins University. But of course, it's not just loans that China's providing. China's also encouraging its Chinese-backed state-owned corporations to tender for projects across Africa. So this is only perhaps part of the picture. If we look at where that funding is going across Africa, about a third of the loans currently outstanding to Africa are to Angola. To some extent, that's a bit of a historic picture. From 2010 to 2018, Angola was the biggest beneficiary of loans originating from China, but that picture slightly distorted because there was quite a lot of restructuring of the loans recently. Then you can see the top five. There's Ethiopia, Zambia, Kenya, and then Egypt. But the spread of loans is across Africa. And for the past couple of years, it's worth noting that the biggest beneficiary is Ghana, followed by South Africa, Egypt. And I think we've already heard about the large construction projects going on in Egypt this morning, Cote d'Ivoire, and then Nigeria. But really, the investment is across Africa, and almost it's easier to say the countries that are not beneficiaries of BRI than those that are. You can see the exceptions. We have Libya, very white there at the top, Somalia, Western Sahara, and the image shows, I don't know how clear it is, but basically the biggest sector to benefit is transport, followed by power, then mining, ICT, and water. And I'm going to look at some of those in a little bit more detail. Just to reflect how important Chinese investment is to Africa, I've just got a graphic here that compares Chinese loans with the World Bank loans. And you can see that across the piece now, Chinese loans are exceeding World Bank loans, albeit at the very end here, you can see that it appears the World Bank has slightly increased over China in 2020. So moving on to the biggest sector, obviously the Belt and Road Initiative is mainly an initiative about hard infrastructure. It's about building that hard trade route through road, rail, airports and seaports. And one of the main routes that China's focused on is obviously China across through the Indian Ocean and then through Africa up through Europe. And that places quite a large focus on Kenya because of the Mombasa port, which is the biggest seaport in East Africa. And there's been a large amount of investment there through China to improve that port. And as well, there's been the Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway, which has improved the time to make that connection, I think from about 10 hours to 4 hours. And the aim is that that railway be extended up through Kenya, Uganda, and then Rwanda. Just to outline two recent investment projects. In Uganda in 2020, there was a $465 million investment in the oil roads. Now, these are primarily aimed at supporting oil exploration and transportation, but obviously they also benefit the rural communities massively across Uganda and connecting, I think it's said, possibly about 80% of rural communities through Uganda to other parts. And then Senegal is the current beneficiary of the Foundiougne Bridge. It's to be the longest bridge in West Africa. This is being built by a Chinese corporation, the China Great Wall Industry Corporation and the China Henan International Corporation Group. And this will link parts of Senegal to the Gambia and also the Casamanca region of Senegal. And just, it's always good to have a picture. There it is. It's a very impressive bit of development. And this is one of the advantages of BRI to Africa, is that it's also exporting Chinese know-how. Obviously, China has a lot of high-speed railways. They have a lot of bridges and therefore a lot of know-how that they're exporting across to Africa. The second sector I want to talk about is power. This is important to Africa for two reasons. One, they're obviously securing their own resources, particularly in terms of oil, and lots of the Angola loans are actually resource backed by oil investments. And also China is a large exporter, has historically been a large exporter of coal. So it is in their interest to build and to facilitate power projects, be it in oil exploration or power stations across Africa. That's the historic position. Under pressure of environment 2021, President Xi Jinping announced that China wouldn't build any new coal-fired power stations across Africa. So what does this mean in terms of opportunity for the energy sector? China is one of the biggest leaders in research and development for renewables. And in 2020, I've just highlighted two projects here. One in Lesotho, which is a solar power project. That will be about 70 megawatts of energy. And this is obviously solar energy can be harnessed through various means. And the most advanced means is via these photovoltaic panels. And that's what's being introduced in Lesotho. And also there's a large river dam project. There's £214 million of investment in Rwanda, which will obviously benefit irrigation, water supplies, and energy. ICT is a new area of investment for China. Just to highlight three projects there. There's the Smart Burkina project, 80 million worth of investment to connect networks across Burkina and all their cities. There's a Ghana project of 158 million to connect telephone wires across the country. And finally, Mozambique, there's a 132 million investment there to modernize their mobile network, primarily through 4G. And what's interesting there is that the investment is actually through a state-owned company, TMCell. Healthcare. China has also invested quite heavily in hospital projects across Africa, including Ghana, Zimbabwe. It's fully funded and constructed the largest hospital in Niger, and also to create markets for Chinese owned pharmaceuticals. It's backed the Africa Centre of Disease Control and also transport a lot of medical know-how in terms of professionals to Africa. Well, thank you for listening. That was sort of just a whistle-stop tour through the sectors, so that we can now pass on to the next speaker.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be a part of this panel, and I would very much like to be there in person, but it's good to be able to connect remotely nevertheless. What I'm going to do is introduce today the Hong Kong International Arbitration Centre as an arbitral institution and Hong Kong as an arbitral seat, and talk to you about the importance of those two as an option for dispute resolution in the context of Belt and Road disputes, and particularly for African parties where you may have a counterparty from mainland China. Of course, when we are entering into large Belt and Road projects, we know that these are capital intensive, long-term, complex, multi-contractual, multi-party, multi-jurisdictional, long-term projects, and it's inevitable in these kinds of arrangements that disputes will arise. So in terms of dispute resolution planning, what decisions are made early on in the contractual framework are really important and can have significant impacts down the road. And so I want to bring to your attention just a number of things that could make a very important difference if you do find yourself in a dispute in a Belt and Road project. But first, let me give you a snapshot, or let me give you a sense of the African-related work that HKIAC has been involved in. So since 2011, HKIAC has administered 66 arbitrations involving a total of 77 different African companies or individuals. And they've come from all over Africa, including Nigeria, Ethiopia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Angola, Uganda, Mozambique, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Djibouti, Egypt, the Seychelles, Mauritius, and South Africa. So really quite a spread. And the counterparties in the cases that we administer are predominantly, and perhaps not surprisingly, from Asia. The number one counterparty is mainland China, number two, Hong Kong, and then we also see a lot of offshore corporations incorporated in the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands with mainland Chinese interests in the corporate structure. We also see a number of cases between African parties and Indian parties or Singaporean parties. The governing law that we see most frequently chosen in our cases involving African parties is Hong Kong law, which is based on English law. The number two is English law, and number three is Chinese law. And of course, governing law is one of the negotiated factors when a dispute resolution clause is being put together. The cases that we see are significant in size. The average amount in dispute across all of them is $70 million. The smallest case we've had on our books is $20,000, and the largest is $3 billion. And most of the cases are general commercial cases or maritime cases or corporate cases, and very often within the broader context of a large infrastructure project. And what we see repeatedly in our cases are contractual disputes coming out of oil field, offshore oil field exploration projects. Now, where does HKIAC sit in the international landscape? Well, HKIAC started as a regional arbitral institution, but is nowadays considered one of the main international arbitration centers. We were ranked third in the Queen Mary University survey of 2021, so third most preferred arbitral institution in the world. And we specialize in arbitrations between Chinese parties and non-Chinese parties. Every year, approximately 40% of our cases involve mainland Chinese parties and foreign parties. And a lot of the Chinese parties on our cases are state-owned enterprises from China. And as we know, a lot of the outbound Belt and Road investment is coming through Chinese state-owned enterprises or other state-controlled or linked entities like policy banks or sovereign wealth funds. And so the expertise that HKIAC has built up over the many years it's been around, 36 years now, is very important because it means that we have knowledge of the pool of qualified neutral arbitrators who have experience in dealing with disputes involving mainland Chinese parties. We also have very qualified bilingual staff at the centre who can deal with such cases, and that is, I think, very important. But what I want to focus the rest of my time on is Hong Kong as a seat of arbitration, particularly in cases between mainland Chinese parties and non-Chinese parties, including African parties. Of course, as you know, Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China. It is part of China, but it is a separate legal jurisdiction. And it is a legal jurisdiction based on the English common law. It is a common law jurisdiction, whereas mainland China is a civil law jurisdiction. In Hong Kong, the arbitration law is based on the UNCITRAL model law, so that is, it embodies international best practice. And the courts in Hong Kong are very practiced and sophisticated when it comes to arbitration, so the decisions that they make are predictable, they're bound by their common law decisions, and the judges that hear arbitration-related matters are specialist judges. Now, notwithstanding the fact that Hong Kong and mainland China are separate jurisdictions, separate legal jurisdictions, there are some important legal instruments that link the two and that are very relevant when you're designing your dispute resolution clauses. And the one I want to focus on now is the most recent. It is called the Mainland Chinese Hong Kong Interim Measures Arrangement. This was concluded 2.5 years ago. And what this arrangement means is that parties to arbitrations that are seated in Hong Kong and administered by one of the eligible institutions such as HKIAC can access the mainland Chinese courts directly for interim relief. And what that means in practical, concrete, and commercially significant terms is that if you are a party to a Hong Kong-seated arbitration, you can apply to the mainland Chinese courts for freezing orders to freeze the assets of your counterparty in mainland China. And what that can do is that can secure the assets against which you will seek enforcement if you are successful in your arbitration. It also means that if you obtain a freezing order of that kind, you will be in a very strong negotiating position if you are seeking to settle the dispute. This is available only if your case is seated in Hong Kong. So if you seat your case elsewhere, for example, in London or in Paris or in Singapore, you will not have this right. Now, HKIAC has an important role under the interim measures arrangement. We issue certificates to applicants that they then put before the mainland Chinese court, confirming that HKIAC has accepted the case. So that gives us access to information to see how this arrangement is working for parties. To date, we know of 75 applications being made directly to mainland Chinese courts. And here on this map, I've set out all of the provinces in which courts have received applications. And what is very important for you to take away is that to date, we know of court orders from all of these different courts that have granted freezing orders over assets now totaling $2.1 billion US. So all of those assets are now frozen and secured for enforcement against an eventual award. And this, as you can appreciate, would have significant leverage for the foreign party in an arbitration between a foreign party and a mainland Chinese party or another foreign party with assets on the mainland. One interesting observation to note is that of the applications we see, 82% of the applicants are foreign parties and 18% of the respondents are mainland Chinese parties. But interestingly, almost 70% of the applicants are mainland Chinese parties and 31% of the respondents are foreign parties. So this arrangement is benefiting both foreign parties but also mainland Chinese parties. And the key is that the assets are on the mainland. So I will stop there and leave you with that takeaway point and the fact that your decision making around your dispute resolution options, if you are dealing with a mainland Chinese party, are very important, and one must seriously consider Hong Kong as a seat for the reasons I've just outlined. Thank you very much.
Really do offer an effective means of supporting arbitration and ensuring that it's effective. Tom, can I now invite you to provide us with the all-important Chinese perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Kwadwo. Yes, thank you, Africa Construction Law Conference, for having me here today. I will speak on Chinese sentiment towards African infrastructure projects in the context of BNRI. To consider China's sentiment, it would be useful to look at some figures. The figures on trade, investments, and infrastructure lending between China and Africa. Yes, so we will start with trade. In 2021, trade volume between Africa and China has reached over 254 billion US dollars. And that represents a 35% increase from 2020. In the first quarter of 2022, trade volume has already reached 64.8 billion. That's a 23% increase as compared to the first quarter of 2021. Now, these figures suggest that trade between China and Africa has remained strong and will most likely continue to grow. And that is despite the negative impacts brought by the COVID pandemic. China has remained Africa's largest trading partner for 12 consecutive years, and there's no sign that this will change in the near future. Now, on investments, China has invested heavily in Africa. According to the World Investment Report 2021, published by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, China is the fourth largest investor in Africa, after Netherlands, UK, and France. And the total FDI stock from China to Africa amounts to over $43 billion. Yes, and these two slides, you see some of the examples of the infrastructure projects that have been involved by China. As you see, these are very extensive involvement of China in these infrastructure projects. Now, turning to lending, between 2007 and 2020, the total lending amount has accumulated over $23 billion. Now, from all these figures, it is clear that China is very much committed to Africa financially. Now, however, Chinese interest in Africa is not only confined to the financial aspect. If you have followed the FOCAC conferences, that is the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which is a very important forum that takes place every 3 years with the heads of states and ministers coming together. In the latest FOCAC conference in 2021, China and Africa had jointly developed a long-term plan called the 2035 vision for China-Africa cooperation, which covers many areas such as the joint development agenda, trade investment finance, industrial cooperation, cultural exchange, promotion of peace and security, and cooperation on global governance. This long-term plan of China-Africa cooperation actually aligns with China's own 2045 plan, which essentially aims to make China a moderately developed economy by 2045. Now, the reality is that China needs a prosperous and friendly Africa to help her in achieving its objectives. And China will need Africa to support its development. For example, if you look at Chinese production of EVs, electronic vehicles, which is one of the key industry sectors that China wishes to develop, the production of EVs in China has increased over 140% as compared to last year. And it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for China to achieve that without Africa's exports to China of the key commodities required, such as cobalt, copper, and lithium. And with many other similar examples, take copper as another example. Zambia is the world's biggest exporter of raw copper, and China is the biggest importer. Cobalt is another good example. DRC is the biggest exporter of cobalt, and China is the biggest importer. All these are driving China and Africa closer together, encouraging then both sides to work together closer. And from my personal experience, speaking to many of the Chinese companies and institutions, the impression I have is that although they may be more cautious now in terms of investing in Africa as compared to 3 years ago, given the impact of COVID, but it is obvious that Belt and Road Initiative is here to stay. It is a long-term strategy of China, and China is very much committed to it. Now I'll pass the floor to the next speaker. Thank you.
Impressed by the numbers and statistics. Your thoughts on the hydrogen industry and how this exciting new industry offers opportunities for Africa in the context of the BRI.
Thank you. Thank you, Kwadwo. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to the LCL for the invitation. So let's get on with it. I'll just share my screen. There you go. Right. Just to make sure we all on the same page about what I'm going to talk about. I thought I should say 3 things about hydrogen. One is that is one of the most common and available form of of energy in the world. The thing is that when you burn hydrogen and it reacts with oxygen, the byproduct is water and energy. So obviously, it clearly is very different from we're talking in the world where we are burning fossil fuels, and the attractiveness of that option of energy resource and fuel cell has been there for a long time. But what makes it so interesting now? The interest in hydrogen has grown up very, very, very quickly over the past decade, given the climate change issues that the world has been facing, and the importance of finding new resources of energy that do not emit as much CO2. Now, so we're talking about in this panel about the future of BRI infrastructure projects in Africa, and the theme of the conference is about going from hindsight to foresight. So my foresight would be that hydrogen will play a major role in BRI infrastructure projects in Africa, and I'll try briefly to demonstrate why that's the case. Right. What is the main challenge that we face at the moment? Is that in the context of what we call energy transition and the discussions about phasing out fossil fuels, it's hard to understand how we can go from a carbon world, a carbon intensive world, to a world where all the emissions we have are not as damaging as the greenhouse gases that we have today. And it's very hard to just turn on and off the switch. And clearly, hydrocarbons will continue to play a role in that space. But the world, so the Stone Age did not end because of the world running out of stone. And there is discussion about whether all the natural resources, the oil that we have, will remain underground and not be explored. That is a particular issue for certain African jurisdictions where the economy is highly dependent on oil, and obviously in regions like Latin America and Africa and others, the natural resources are a key element to develop the economies in the future. So how do you keep them relevant, capture the wealth, and still commit to the Paris Agreement objectives? So just to give you an idea, in China today, 86% of the fossil fuels, so 80% of the power matrix comes out of fossil fuels. So China has a challenge in itself to become less carbon intensive. The BRI project, we heard from Krista and Tom today, is also carbon intensive. It's about building infrastructure. And so the question is, can hydrogen be part of the solution? When we look into the prognostics of the international of IMF on the use by the African continent of energy, you see that currently we have a lot of it coming from either biomass or fossil fuels. The projections are they're going to carry on up to 2050 using a lot of fossil fuels, but in the next 50 years you see a big uptick in wind power. Can the BRI initiative help with that? Now, the China published a very detailed plan earlier this year, and having committed to become net zero by 2060, obviously is looking very carefully and very closely to its net zero goals. So the scaling up of hydrogen is in the forefront of the agenda internally, but also as a part of their geopolitical efforts in scaling up their presence in the African continent. And you see that it does have a big competitor. A recent article from a high street journal was already reporting on the hydrogen war. So obviously Europe, in particular Germany, has been very, very keen and attentive to what's going on in Africa in the hydrogen space. And there's a number of initiatives between Europe and a number of African countries to develop hydrogen projects. And we're going to see that in a minute. Now, how hydrogen can be relevant to BRI. I mentioned earlier that hydrogen is attractive because at the point of combustion, this byproduct is energy and water. So the question around hydrogen is not what happens at the point of combustion or point of use of this energy resource, but how that is produced, because hydrogen is not available on its own in the environment. So you need to use it needs to be is a derived product either from methane or water, and nowadays over 80%, 85% of the hydrogen produced in the world comes from natural gas and other resource and coal. So they are polluting by themselves. So the focus of our discussion is really on green hydrogen. How do you produce hydrogen without creating more pollution? And this requires three elements: renewable energy, so solar, wind, fresh water, so it's not salty water, but it's clean water that for electrolysis, and infrastructure potential to build the infrastructure around upstream, downstream, and distribution of hydrogen for different applications. So when we look at the continent, and if you look at the information that I have on the screen, and you combine Middle East and North Africa with Sub-Saharan Africa, you get a sense of the opportunity here for green hydrogen. So what this graph showing that is the potential for reduction of hydrogen under $1.5 a kilogram by 2050. That means commercially viable hydrogen. Now, the applications that can the BRR can invest on, obviously, a number of them are very much in line with BRI strategy. So you can see shipping in 42 ports in 34 continents, roads, production and storage facilities, so road transport, production and storage facilities. All of them could help. All of this infrastructure that can be used for the development of a green hydrogen economy. And in this particular study is a Harvard study that I picked from. They pointed out Morocco and Namibia as being the African countries best positioned for green hydrogen because they had renewable energy, either solar or wind infrastructure already in place or being developed. Fresh water, that doesn't mean salt water. So because if you have salt water, you need desalinizers. And then you have the infrastructure potential, which is in those two countries as well advanced. Nigeria is not behind this. Just as last week, you had the first German-Nigerian hydrogen office green hydrogen symposium. You can see the statement from your Minister of Environment about the importance of green hydrogen and the development of green hydrogen. But there has been studies elsewhere in Africa. There's a number of initiatives, including the African Hydrogen Partnership across several countries. And you can see, and this is a map of how you could have hydrogen routes across Africa. We don't have the time to get into details here, but as you can see that there's a huge potential for development of projects across the continent. And indeed, the projects have been developed. We take another day for a conference for us to talk about them, but there are projects that have been identified based on our research, and some of them, there are some will start this year, some will start depending on the complexity in the next 3 or 4 years. And as being the litigator in the room, we have been following a number of this project, and obviously these involve high risks, and the major role that we play here is to ensure that these risks are identified, allocated, mitigated, and we heard from HKIAC as an arbitral institution which is very well positioned to deal with these issues. Arbitration will be part of the matrix of these hydrogen projects because they combine typically partners who have been doing business together for a long time, so combination of wind companies and oil companies, infrastructure players across a number of different jurisdictions, which makes arbitration ideally positioned to deal with these issues arising out of those projects. But obviously, as in Africa, as in Latin America, the importance of other ADR techniques cannot be understated. And I understand that my time has already finished, so I'll leave time for the questions. Thank you very much.
Knit together some of the themes we've heard on some of the earlier panels, and indeed on some of the other sessions. I think the importance of the need for infrastructure, the need for energy and development across the African continent, and the role that BRI can play in it, it has to be balanced with sustainability and the low carbon future. And what you've outlined with regard to hydrogen has been an excellent and important illustration of that. So thank you. I'll now just check with Ngo whether we have time for a few questions. Yes. So could I invite any questions that anyone may have from the floor, or anything that's being submitted from those following us remotely? And if there's no questions right away, I've got a question for the panel. Anyone can chip in on this, but I think I'll fire this at Krista first off, if that's okay, Krista. We've heard in some of the other talks and some of the discussions certain concerns with regard to local content in relation to China-backed projects. And in relation to how perhaps there might be concerns about how certain projects under the BRI and or otherwise backed by China may not have led to the transfer of know-how. We had the example in Renata's talk about O&M manuals being left in Chinese only. Equally, though, we've also heard and appreciated from your talk about how this huge amount of know-how being brought from China and made available in Africa is allowing for some of these extremely impressive developments and pieces of infrastructure which are being put in place. So I don't know, Krista, if you had any just comments about the striking and the finding of that balance, and any views about what that teaches us for the future.
I mean, I think that with any foreign investment and involvement of international and global parties, there is always a concern over language and having interpreters and translators. However, what I think is a positive thing is that China is quite aware of almost the unique nature of its own language. It does have a vast project to export Mandarin Chinese culture across Africa. There will, I think, inevitably be difficulties, but I think looking particularly at the healthcare experience that I have, China is aware of the need to work locally. It's trying to build partners. The part of the point of BRI is to create not just this infrastructure, but a sort of trade relationship with Africa. And that's obviously not sustainable unless they appreciate they've got to work locally and overcome problems like language barriers.
Thanks very much indeed, Krista. That's very helpful. And I think that chimed with what Tom was saying about what is China's interest to see a prosperous and stable Africa. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Gideon Kamia from HKIAC. My question relates to the campaign to have the courts in Hong Kong or England or China, the centers of arbitration. Shouldn't we be advocating for such entities to be in the relevant jurisdictions within Africa so that the lawyers can develop local capacity to handle any local issues to mitigate capital flight?
Thank you very much indeed, Gideon. That is a very, very important and relevant question. I wonder if anyone in the panel would like to give any views on that. Please go ahead, Luiz. So that's on whether and to the extent to which we should be promoting the use of local African dispute resolution fora. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And over the past 20 years, we faced the same questions in Latin America. And I think there's need for an openness. And those large projects, you're going to have a base layer of contracts that might involve a concession, might involve something that's really, administrative contracts that more likely than not to be under local law. But you need to face the reality that there will be some investors that will have to put the financing on the project, and some investors who will be sort of sponsor the projects or build the infrastructure, and they are not necessarily African entities, right? And there'll be an element of negotiation and bargaining, but ultimately, for projects to come together, that there's going to be a balance between putting the funds in or accepting to build a company in the continent, and having the comfort of having disputes potentially resolved abroad. And I'm totally with you. I think there need to be the bar, the African bar is rising, is rising to the challenging. I think this conference is one example of that. But we need to balance the interests, and what we can see in Latin America is really a very successful outcome of that exchange. So just to give an example, Brazil is today one of the second largest user of ICC arbitration. So, and that doesn't mean that arbitrations will be seated in Europe forever. And now, because we do have a very sophisticated bar, and that's, I think Nigeria is one of the most sophisticated in Africa. The chances are that you're going to keep developing that bar, and arbitrations will start being seated more often in the continent. But it's a service that you need to make investors confident about, and that takes a little bit of time.
Thank you very much, Luiz. Any other questions from the floor? Well, if no more questions, I would just ask you all to join me in thanking each of our 4 expert panelists for their time and insights today. It's been really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwadwo. So I've just been informed that there is light breakfast served just the next room after this. So please, can we take a break for 10 minutes and then we'll converge back at the hall. Thank you.